That's love. Listen, I want to tell you something. I want to tell you something real quick. We tell people all the time, you got to love God, you got to love God, you got to love God. And that's true. It's the great commandment. To love Him with all of our heart, our mind, our soul, our strength. It's the great commandment to love God. But that's the goal. That's not the entry.
All right.
That's what we become. Is a person who loves Him with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength.
Yes, yes.
But before we can ever love Him, John said, how can you say you love Him when you don't love your brother? God whom you've not seen, your brother whom you have seen. You don't love God if you don't love your brother. And if you say you love God when you don't love your brother, it's a lie.
That's right.
You cannot love God unless you love your brother. I made up in my mind when I see people, I can know them for 5 minutes and I'm going to tell them I love you.
That's right.
You know why I'm going to tell them I love them? Because I'm not loving them with my love. My love is fickle. My love is so temporary. But I'm loving them with the love of God. I'm loving them the way God would love them. And if I'm not, I better try. But I can't love God till I love you. You can't love God till you love me. And you know what? We have to love one another. How do we love one another? We love one another as we love ourselves. Ooh. Now we know why we don't love one another. Because we don't love ourselves. You know why we don't love ourselves? Because we know ourselves. Familiarity breeds contempt. And when we look in the mirror, we know. We know every dirty deed. We know the manipulation. We hate ourselves for our weakness. We hate ourselves for our inconsistency. We hate ourselves for all of our imperfections. And we take it out on others.
That's right, brothers.
He said you've got to love your neighbor as yourself. So the real perplexity is, how do I love myself? You cannot love yourself until you know He loves you. And when you know He loves you, there's a process that begins where you know He loves you. Hallelujah. And that process is going to take you into loving yourself. And it won't stop there. And a lot have stopped right there and said, okay, He loves me and I love me. That feels great. But that's not it. It's going to take you into loving your neighbor. And there's going to be a neighborly love and grace and mercy and compassion. Not something that condones and endorses, but one that restores and lifts up. Hallelujah. And it doesn't stop with loving your neighbor, but ultimately you will love the Lord thy God with all of your heart, your mind, your soul, and strength. But you can't love God till you know He loves you. And that's why John said we only love Him because He first loved us. The process begins at the foot of the cross. You cannot expect to love your neighbor until you stare longingly into the love of God. You cannot expect to love yourself, and you can't expect to love God until you stare longingly into the love of God. Paul said, I am persuaded that nothing shall be able to separate me from the love of God. I am persuaded that nothing shall be able to separate me from the love of God. What persuaded him? Let me tell you what persuaded him. It persuaded him when he was on the road to Damascus and he was sitting smug on his horse or whatever, just riding down the road, had in his hand letters that would kill the Christians. And he was self-righteous and he was full of himself. He was excited to go do this thing. And then all of a sudden the light began to shine above the noonday sun, knocked him off his high horse, laid him out in the middle of the street. Blind he was and humble before God. He knew it was God because he feared that presence. That's how he knew God, only from the standpoint of fear. Only from the standpoint of fear. And so he looked up and he said, he hears this voice that says, Saul, Saul, why persecutest thou me? You're persecuting me. You think you're doing me a favor, but you're persecuting me. And Saul said, but Lord, how am I persecuting you? Who are you anyway, Lord? And when the Lord said, I am Jesus, and you're persecuting me. When Saul realized that it was Jesus talking to him, as a Jew who understood the law and the consequences of breaking it, I would submit he fully anticipated just getting completely destroyed on the spot. But when the hand of God unpried his traditional self-righteous fingers from those documents, said, come on, get up, get up, get up. Go to the Senate. I'll tell you what you're supposed to do. He said, oh, wait a minute. I'm persuaded. And a shipwreck can't persuade me otherwise. And a snake bite can't persuade me otherwise. And 40 stripes can't persuade me otherwise. I am persuaded that neither death, nor height, nor angels, nor principalities, nor powers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor death, nor life, nor any other creature shall be able to separate me from the love